What would you do if the woman you were forced to marry turned out to be hiding a secret so shocking it could destroy everything you thought you knew about love, identity, and survival? Stay with me, because this story will twist your heart, test your beliefs, and leave you questioning every judgment you've ever made. And before we begin, make sure you hit subscribe, because stories like this don't just entertain, they change you. The wind howled through the jagged peaks of the mountains like a warning that never stopped, a sound that had become part of Eli Turner's existence ever since he chose to live alone in a weather-beaten cabin miles away from the nearest town, a place where men went not to be found, but to forget, and Eli had long ago decided the world had nothing left for him except silence, hard work, and the slow passing of days marked only by the rise and fall of the sun. But everything changed the day he rode into town with nothing but a sack of grain to trade and walked out with a wife he never asked for, a woman whose face he had not even seen, her head covered with a rough cloth sack tied at the neck, as if she were an object rather than a human being. And though Eli was a man hardened by years of solitude, even he felt something uneasy stir in his chest when the deal was made with barely a word exchanged, the townsfolk whispering behind their hands as though they were relieved to be rid of her. And the old merchant who arranged it all avoided Eli's eyes when he said, "No returns," in a tone that sounded more like a warning than a condition. But Eli, driven more by curiosity than need, agreed, convincing himself that maybe having another person in the cabin would not be the burden he feared. Maybe it would break the endless silence. Maybe it would change something inside him that had long since gone cold. And so he lifted the woman onto his horse, her body tense and unmoving, her hands bound loosely in front of her as if even the ropes doubted her will to escape, and he rode back into the mountains with the strange, silent figure behind him, the sack over her head shifting slightly with each movement as though hiding a truth too dangerous to reveal. And the journey back felt longer than usual, the sky darkening earlier than it should have, the air growing heavier as if the mountains themselves were watching, waiting for something inevitable to unfold. And when Eli finally reached his cabin, he hesitated for the first time in years before stepping inside, the door creaking open like a reluctant witness, and he guided the woman in, cutting the ropes from her wrists but saying nothing, unsure of what words could possibly fit a moment like this. And she stood there, still as stone, her breathing faint but steady, her head slightly tilted as if listening for something beyond the walls. And Eli felt a flicker of unease crawl up his spine, but he shook it off, telling himself she was just another broken soul cast aside by a cruel world, nothing more, nothing less. And yet something about her presence made the air feel different, charged in a way he could not explain. And as the fire crackled in the hearth, casting flickering shadows across the room, Eli finally stepped closer, his hand reaching toward the sack, his voice rough as he said, "You can take it off now." But she did not move, did not respond, and for a moment he wondered if she even could, if whatever life she had before had stripped her of more than just her freedom. And so, with a deep breath, he made the decision himself, his fingers grasping the edge of the sack and pulling it upward, slowly, cautiously, as though unveiling something sacred or cursed. And when the fabric cleared her face, Eli staggered back as if struck, his breath catching in his throat. Because the woman before him was not what he expected, not broken, not disfigured, not anything the whispers in town had suggested, but breathtakingly beautiful, her features sharp yet soft, her skin pale against the firelight, her eyes a piercing shade that seemed almost unreal, as if they held stories too vast to comprehend. And yet it was not her beauty that shocked him most, but the expression on her face, a calm, almost haunting stillness that carried no fear, no relief, no emotion at all, just an eerie awareness that made him feel as though he was the one being studied, the one being judged. And for a long moment neither of them spoke, the silence stretching between them like a fragile thread ready to snap, until she finally whispered, her voice soft but clear, "You shouldn't have brought me here." And those words, simple as they were, sent a chill through Eli that no mountain winter ever could, because there was no anger in her tone, no resentment, only a quiet certainty, as if she were stating a fact already set in stone. And Eli, stubborn as ever, shook his head and replied, "You're here now," trying to sound firm, trying to reclaim some sense of control over a situation that already felt like it was slipping beyond his grasp. But deep down, something told him this was no ordinary arrangement, no simple story of a man buying a bride. And as the days passed, that feeling only grew stronger, because the woman, who eventually told him her name was Leora, was unlike anyone he had ever known. She spoke little but observed everything, moving through the cabin with a quiet grace that felt almost unnatural, as though she did not belong to the same world as him. And strange things began to happen, small at first, things Eli could dismiss as coincidence. The fire burning brighter without being fed, the wind outside falling silent whenever she stepped beyond the door, the animals in the forest keeping their distance as if sensing something they could not understand. But then came the night that changed everything, the night Eli woke to find Leora standing outside under the full moon, her head tilted toward the sky, her eyes glowing faintly in the darkness, and the air around her shimmering like heat over stone. And when he called her name, she turned slowly, that same calm expression on her face, and said, "They're coming." And before Eli could ask what she meant, the ground beneath them trembled, a low rumble echoing through the mountains as shadows moved along the ridges, shapes too large and too deliberate to be anything natural. And in that moment, Eli realized the truth he had been avoiding, the truth hidden beneath the sack, beneath the silence, beneath the deal he thought was so simple. He had not brought home a wife, he had brought home something the world had tried to hide, something powerful, something dangerous, something that now threatened to unravel everything he had built. And as the shadows drew closer and the wind began to scream once more, Leora stepped toward him, her hand reaching out, her voice steady as she said, "If you stay, your life ends tonight, but if you trust me, everything will change." And Eli, a man who had spent his entire life trusting no one but himself, found himself standing at the edge of a choice he never expected, one that would lead him into a truth far greater than the mountains, far darker than the silence he once called peace, and far more powerful than anything he could have ever imagined.